Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Whitewolf, and I'm going to share. I'm recently received my doctorate in STEM education, and so I have to shout it to the world what I studied for the last 4 years, and that's what I'm doing today. So thanks for coming, and I'm going to leave a little bit of time for questions at the end, because sometimes this brings up ideas in people, especially educators' minds. So um, this is me. That's my contact information. You guys are all seeing this, right? Okay. Uh, I come from a family of makers, or I'm in a family of makers. My two daughters, one of them's in college, and the other one will be going to college next year. But we've always just kind of made stuff together. I started my Maker Ed journey at the Carnegie Science Fab Lab. I opened up the new Fab Lab there back in 2015, and this is a picture of the lab before it got messy. Now, if anybody here is from Fab Lab Carnegie Science Center, does not look this clean anymore. But in addition to our the space that we have based in the museum, we had two mobile Fab Labs, and we started with this really big truck as a mobile Fab Lab. And if you've ever been to Pittsburgh, you'll know that the streets are small and there's a lot of hills, and driving a big truck is difficult, especially finding parking for such a big truck. So pretty soon after we started, we would take our giant Fab Lab out to schools and places, and it was cumbersome. So we eventually shifted to a van-based model, which really is less about using the van as a classroom and more about moving the tools and technologies inside the schools in a classroom. So when we started doing this at the Fab Lab Carnegie Science Center, I really started getting interested in how these spaces are going to be working in schools. And that's when I started taking classes at the University of Pittsburgh. But in the meantime, I got a job with the Fab Foundation, and I was managing some K-12 work for them. I was the director of K-12 education, and that's where I really started to see that this was a challenge. How these maker spaces are working in schools. It is a worldwide challenge. It's not just Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's not even just in the United States. There are people everywhere that are installing maker spaces at schools and really not having the systems in place to make those a success. And really, what are those systems? One of the projects that I worked on at the Fab Foundation is the Scopes DF website. If you haven't checked this out, it's a great website. It has some resources for digital fabrication lesson plans, and it's all open source. You can upload your own lesson plans. You can see what other people have, and you can search by tools and technologies. So it's a great source. So after I left Fab Foundation, I started EduFab, which is where I am today. And this is really where the meat of my research took place when I was have my own organization. And what EduFab does is we do consultation work. We like to do strategic planning for schools and maker spaces, for schools that are adding digital maker spaces into their schools. So kind of as Michael Stone was saying earlier, we like to do less about the stuff and more about the staff. So, how are we prepared to use these tools, and really what's going to make a change? So this really got me thinking about as the maker movement really started to catch momentum, I'd say in the 2010 era, and all of these prices started coming down and schools were adding maker spaces. What really happened in the US that I saw, and maybe worldwide, is what I like to call the makerspace arms race. And this is a school adding a makerspace to catch up with the rest of the schools around them. So this is very, very popular, especially here in Pittsburgh, where we have over 300 school-based makerspaces in our greater Pittsburgh area. We have a ton of makerspaces. And so as schools are really arming up for the makerspace race, I'm really interested in learning what are the ramifications of that in our children's education. And so I started to research how are schools using Fab Labs, and I found in the research that really a lot of schools use them as a novelty experience for the kids. Some of them use them for gifted and run programs that are rewards for their students. A lot of schools teach about the technology. So you go to a Fab Lab class to learn how to 3D print or learn how to laser cut or whatever the technological learning outcome is. And this is pretty prevalent in the research that's available out about digital makerspaces in schools. So what I like to think about is how these can be used in schools. And this is really more along what they're doing in Hamilton County. And there are some really bright spots across the nation and across the world that are doing this a little bit differently than just teaching to the technology. And that's teaching through the technology. So what are we teaching with the technology? Classroom content can be learned through design, enhanced problem-based learning, which of course you've seen. And then as kind of a subset of problem-based learning will be design-based learning, which really brings it home. If you're talking about a PBL unit and you have a nice artifact that the children can share, that the kids can share with each other, that's really taking PBL and putting that kind of constructionist core into it. Like, here's my artifact of learning and I can share about it. So these are the things that we'd really like to see across the globe as when you put digital fabrication tools in makerspaces in schools. And so through my research, I came up with a problem of practice, and this would be my problem of practice, that schools are not using Fab Labs and digital makerspaces for learning classroom content. So I really focused in on those teachers that have a classroom and how the tools are used in that classroom. So I'm not necessarily focusing so much on the tech ed teachers or those Fab Lab teachers, but how can these tools be used for history and foreign language and art and science and those kind of content area classes. So when I say authentic, I know this will be blurry and I'm sorry. When I say authentic learning for makerspaces, I'm really talking about that kind of content that the teachers are trying to teach to. So I came up with this fishbone diagram, and a fishbone diagram is basically all of the kind of challenges that lead towards my problem of practice. And I took it from a teacher's perspective. Really, what are we doing for the teachers? How are we supporting the teachers? How are teachers expected to use this? How are they empowered to use these? Are they prepared to use these tools? And really the challenges that I saw were time and space as a big challenge. So this yellow kind of fishbone describes the time and space challenges. The technology knowledge, a teacher knowing about technology is a pretty big challenge, but also the pedagogy and integration knowledge. So just because a teacher knows how to use a tool doesn't mean they know how to use a tool with students. There's a big difference. And then in the green is a support network, and that's really about PLCs or professional learning communities. And teachers tend to find those. And in fact, this network, the Fab Educators Network, I like to think of as a pretty broad PLC for teachers to lean on each other. And then of course, the gray one is standardized testing, which nobody will talk about or touch, but is there, and you have to put it on your diagram because standardized testing isn't going away anytime soon here. So that I started my research study as soon as I left the Fab Foundation. I started actually implementing my research study. And what I did was I did an intervention. I worked one-to-one with classroom teachers to develop lesson plans for their classroom content that integrated digital fabrication technologies. One of the things that I really leaned into was this idea of the TPAC framework, and TPAC stands for technological, pedagogical, and content knowledge. And these are three areas or domains of knowledge that teachers need to enact when they're using tools and technologies for teaching. They obviously need to know their content. And they need to have a pedagogical or learning theory understanding of how their students are engaging and how to engage with the students. And they also need to learn the technology. But not only do they need to know those three areas, but they kind of need to know the middle too. So all of those overlaps. You've got your technical pedagogical overlap, you've got your technological content overlap, and you've got that middle part, which is really hard for teachers to come to that without addressing all of these different areas. So I leaned into this research, which I really, really like, this TPAC framework. And I invented an intervention procedure. This is what I actually studied. So I spent about 5 to 7 hours with each teacher. And we did an intro meeting where we talked about what was happening in the intervention. We talked about I may have to teach them technology. A couple of teachers I taught from scratch kind of how to use a vinyl cutter. And then we'd had some one-to-one idea and research sessions, and then a lesson development session. And then they were to kind of finish that lesson on their own time and come back. And we do some lesson sharing with the rest of the group. Now I ended up only being able to work with two sets of 2 teachers each. But I did spend a lot of time with them, and I collected data along the way. We did some surveys. We did a lot of surveys. We did some interviews, which I found fascinating. That's kind of what I want to share with you. A lot of the takeaways that I got from the learnings that I got from my research came from the discussions that I had with the teachers. So some of the themes I noticed are in the blue, and then the quotes from the teachers themselves are in the yellow. The theme of expanded learning opportunities for students. This happened for those teachers that were kind of teaching about the technology, as well as the teachers that are teaching through the technology. I worked with 2 tech ed teachers, and then I worked with 2 content area teachers, and my tech ed teachers really we really challenged them to think about using these tools for competencies or for what we were calling 21st century skills. So they were thinking about the tools in a different way rather than follow this project and you will learn how to run the laser cutter. It was more about develop this project idea and we'll learn about the SDGs, or we'll learn about how women are dropping out of STEM. So whatever their project was, we really thought about learning objectives that were different than the technology itself, which was a different approach for those tech ed teachers. And then as far as the classroom teachers, I had like a music teacher and I had a librarian, and they were both elementary school. So that was fun. So I think some of these quotes are from them, especially the ones who said this will be a more memorable project for the kids because of the technology. So one teacher took a lesson that she had on mapping on a world map, and we made it into a vinyl cut, a project using the vinyl cutter. And she thought that just having that technology along with an old lesson that she had would really make it a much more memorable project. So the student excitement and the novelty, and then the confidence in the technology. So that was something I noticed the teachers needed a little attention to as we went on. And then something that really stood out to me was there was a big difference between the comfort level of the teachers to use the technology themselves versus the comfort level of the teachers to use the technology with their students. So although a lot of the survey responses were very high in their confidence, oh, you taught me, I can use a vinyl cutter all day long and make myself stickers, but they had a little, there's a difference between using it to make yourself stickers on your own time versus using that vinyl cutter in the classroom with a whole group of students. And they felt that kind of pressure, and that it was a lot different for them, and they didn't, and they were also, although they might have felt prepared, they're also worried that their kids wouldn't be prepared. Something that the two content area teachers shared with me was, I don't know how tech savvy the students are. Will they come into my classroom knowing how to use a mouse, or knowing how to open up Google Docs, or understanding how to right click? So those types of like general technological competencies, they really had no idea where their kids stood on that. So can that music teacher take the extra time to teach their students how to open up a Google file, or how to share something in a shared drive? Those types of competencies were really kind of a mystery to those people. Now, the tech ed teachers, they knew where their kids fell as far as technological literacy went. But I think picking out the difference between teaching a teacher how to use a tool and then teaching them, and then having confidence using that tool with students, is two completely different things. And the research really showed that out. So some of the learnings I learned from doing this intervention with these 4 teachers was that as much as I talked about the TPAC framework, I could have done some more work in there. We could have really leaned into that overlap of technological and pedagogical knowledge, as shown by their confidence level with the technology, their confidence level teaching, but yet they were still having that not very confident in that kind of overlap. So that's something that I would do differently in this. Another learning that I had that was interesting to me was that lesson planning is not necessarily something that everyone does. I entered the assumption that lesson planning was an embedded practice for all teachers. Teachers do lesson plans, but I found out that the tech ed teachers specifically don't do lesson plans. They actually do project plans. And so what they focus on the project in their planning process. And so their planning involves what project are the kids going to do, and what materials and tools do we need, and what technology literacies do they know to finish this project. So that was very interesting to me. And even with the subject area teachers, it was a little bit of, it was the way that we did our lesson plans together was definitely not embedded practice, not something that they do on their day-to-day. They don't work with other teachers when they develop lesson plans in elementary school. And again, I know that's kind of like the content silos, as it were. But so thinking about a teacher developing lesson plans by themselves, and then when they had a chance to do it with me, I was not enforcing their embedded practice. I was kind of doing a novelty thing with them, which was not my intention. And so really to attend to their need to practice this a little bit more, it would have been great if we could have modeled the lesson together, or co-taught, demonstrated the project, or if I had even been able to follow them with my research into their classroom. But I wasn't able to do any of that. So And then one of my biggest takeaways, probably the biggest takeaway, was my fishbone needed some work. Really learning about what the teachers were saying in their interviews about how well prepared are their students to actually do this digital fabrication technology. I added a whole new like fishbone, and that would be student preparedness. And this is about, where do your students fall, and do you know where they fall before they come into your classroom? If your students in middle school aren't prepared to use a high school makerspace, which is completely digital fabrication because they've never had any of that technology learning, and their competencies just aren't there, then it's kind of ridiculous or difficult to have them come in. And so you're teaching them from the very beginning, what is a 3D printer? What is, how do you use a mouse? How do you use a, how do you code? So sometimes it's really that challenging for a teacher. So not only are they challenged to integrate technology with their lesson plan, but now they're teaching their students how to, safely download a file and then upload it into a shared drive. So really thinking about adding a whole new section to my problem statement. I found that was interesting. Okay, I might have some extra time because I feel like I summarized my research fairly well.
We got 5 minutes, well done.
I wanted to say at the end, this is my contact information, and I actually, this Calendly link, calendly.com. If you go there, you can schedule a meeting with me and it will magically pop up on my calendar. And I typically show up to those meetings. For the most part, I try. So if you want to grab some time on my schedule, please do. If you have any more, if you want to talk a little bit more about my research, I can talk all day about it. But does anybody have any questions, or were there any things that came up in the chat?
Liz, is it okay if I ask a question?
Yeah.
I just wanted to know if the type of train the trainer program in the US is the way to go with these makerspaces, because generally here in the Czech Republic, we have to do it for at least 15 teachers at a time. So I don't know what is the way in which you should teach teachers, because your methodology seems great, but teachers in the Czech Republic are always time famined. So how do we find a solution towards that?
So the solution is really more into how the school is integrating the makerspace in general. It's not, and that's something that I really kind of discovered after my dissertation, was the system of the school is not necessarily set up for every teacher to use digital fabrication to the depth that it has the potential to reach students. So if I could teach every teacher in that school how to use a 3D printer well enough that they can use it with their students, that would be amazing. However, same in the US, in most places in the US, we just don't have the time for that. And most of the teachers just don't have the growth mindset, for one, or the time or the interest, so they don't have the support. So a way that I've seen this to work, and this is what they do in Chattanooga and a lot of other districts that make this successful, is they have what I like to call a makerspace integration specialist. And this is an important role that kind of serves as a Fab Lab manager or integration person. And that person will work one-to-one, will basically be the me in this scenario, in my research scenario, like where's the Liz in this? That maker integration specialist can work with the teachers and develop lesson plans, so that the teachers don't have to be a professional 3D printer or understand the laser cutter to the depth that the integration specialist does. But I like to think of that integration specialist role kind of like you would imagine a librarian role would be in a school, where the librarian really knows the books that are on the shelves, and they know what the content is, and they know which books to pull out for which teachers, depending on what that teacher is using. So the teachers interact with the librarian in a way that they're like, hey, we're studying the water cycle, what do you got? And the librarian pulls out some books and gives them some resources, and in the best case scenario, we'll do some co-teaching with that person. Well, that same librarian of the makerspace is an important role too, because makerspace specialist knows the tools and the technologies and the resources and has project ideas, and the teacher can come to that person and say, hey, we're doing a water cycle lesson, or we're doing a water cycle curriculum. What do you got? So it's really less about preparing the individual teachers and taking that time, because it is a lot of time, and more about putting some changes into the system that will make the whole system function better within school. So it's not as it's not as simple as teachers just having more time. But that is a great question.
Liz, we have a question in the chat from Susie about why isn't this integrated in teacher education, and should it be?
It absolutely should be. And one of the things that I'm on the lookout for now are seeing makerspaces in higher ed. Of course, I see a ton of makerspaces in higher ed, even in where at the University of Pittsburgh and in Carnegie Mellon right down the road. But the problem with the higher education makerspaces is they're for architecture students, or they're for engineering students, or they're for the art department. And seeing a makerspace, a fully functional like digital fabrication makerspace within that school of ed is very rare to see. It's very rare to see school of eds making that leap into digital fabrication. And I feel like they're all behind the ball. And those who aren't behind the ball, great. They're doing excellent work, but it's hard to embed this into your teacher education training program when you don't even have the facilities on campus that are available to use. And the other problem with higher ed is just research takes a long time to catch up to what's happening in the classroom. Like when I did my research, there's not a lot of empirical studies. And so having faculty, there's really there's that kind of academia gap that we talk about where we're doing stuff, we're practitioners, and yet the academics are talking a little bit different. So bridging that gap is very important to make this happen quicker in higher ed. So as the research starts coming out, and as professors and academic departments start to see that this research is empirical and there are outcomes and they are positive, then I think we'll see this really take wave in the higher ed. But as it stands now, especially in the US, it's really rare to see a kind of digital makerspace housed completely in the School of Ed and used for education classes. So Nathan said University of Tulsa. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
looks like
great.
we all have to go to Oklahoma to become teachers. That's what we're doing.